thank you for joining. I have to say, she didn't ask for the book to be here. I insisted. I know it's awkward when someone does that for you, so it's on me. In the spirit of the conversations we've been having about careers, you and I chatted before. We didn't chat about this. And also in the spirit of gotcha questions. What actually was your first job?
What was my first job was every Saturday in an independent bookstore. And I still think, assuming the independent bookstores survive, if I found myself with nothing else to do, I'd be really happy still in an independent bookstore.
Nice. Selling books or filing?
Yes,
or like just
selling. I was on the floor.
Awesome. There was somebody here whose job was, I think, like scrubbing books with a toothbrush. Is that Zoe? So we can compare notes on what the correct book technique was. So I thought we won. I thought we were all set. All you had to do was just adapt, behave a certain way, not give up too early, and women would be all set. Can't women have it all?
Women can, men can, we can. I prefer not to talk less about women and more about all of us. And there are a lot of academics in this audience. And I was speaking earlier with a colleague from NYU, and we were saying, look, if everybody can live like academics, absolutely you can do it. If you and your husband both have secure, flexible jobs where you have to show up a certain number of fixed hours a week, which you do as an academic, but the rest of the time you decide when to work, what you're going to do. You can slow it down, write an article or not write an article, or write it faster or slower. It is completely doable. And that was my world until I was about 50. And it's not that it's all easy. You have to get tenure, and that's hard, but I went to Washington and worked the way most people work on someone else's schedule, even a great boss. Hillary Clinton was a great boss. By Washington standards, she came in, practically at noon. She came in at 8, and she left at 7. And though, many Washington high-level officials come in at 6:30, and you have to get in there earlier than that for the meeting. So she was great. Everything was great. It's just that my schedule depended on the world. And my children, back in Princeton, 3.5 hours away, had their own ideas. And I actually had to choose. And the article is less a lament about me. Many people thought I was complaining. I'm not complaining. It was, wow, if you can't do it with every advantage in the world, including full-time help at home and a lead parent husband, if I can't do it and I'm plenty ambitious, something is structurally wrong. We are not going to get there. And we heard this morning, it'll take 100 years. James Manyika pointed out 100 years to get to parity in the C-suite at this rate. And actually, we're going backwards in some ways.
Well, it was interesting because the article and then the book changed the conversation people were having about gender in the workplace, men and women. But the focus had been on women. And as you say, you like talking more expansively about all genders. How did we miss this for so long? Why were people in the HR profession just saying like, nah, we have regular leaves, we have maternity leave, we have these policies in the government, we're fine. How did we as a society miss something that you so articulately and thoughtfully point out that has actually caused us to now say, actually, we have been missing this much broader issue?
I think the first thing to say is that the wave of conversation, which certainly I did not expect, frankly, I don't think the editors at The Atlantic expected. The week before the Atlantic cover story came out, we couldn't get me onto lots of TV shows because it was like, oh, this is same old, yet another woman writing about how hard it is to balance work and family. I think I caught a generational wave, and that is critical to where I think we have to go. That what happened was lots of mothers and daughters, or sisters and younger sisters, were having this conversation, and younger women were saying, it just doesn't seem so easy. I'm looking at lots of older women, I either don't want their life, or I'm seeing that they really are having a harder time. And that article became something that mothers and daughters sent to each other, also a certain amount of wives and husbands. I'd get men coming up to me saying, my wife gave me your article. Pause. Which meant, and we had a big fight. But I think there's this big generational shift, because I didn't say anything other people hadn't said. I think then we have started looking exactly like, look, we're stuck at 20%. We've been at 20%, between 15 and 20% women in the C-suite in good industries, not in tech, but in other industries, for 20 years, since 1990. So I think the numbers, we realize, whoa, we're not making progress. What I now think is, as long as we keep talking about this as a women's issue, we will never make the progress we need. Because what we're doing is constantly saying earning an income is for men and women to do, either by choice or economic necessity. Most couples in this country, economic necessity. But care is a woman's job. And that just won't work. It's a halfway revolution. You can't do it that way. And yet reflexively, even this morning, people are saying companies are doing this for the women in their ranks. Companies are letting mothers take time out. Well, the one thing I hope you take away from this conversation, banish the word mother from your vocabulary every time you talk about children. And you heard, actually, Michelle, I just heard you say parental leave. Always, always, always talk about parents, because it takes two, still, even in California, to have a child. Or two sets of genes, anyway. We won't go any further than that. And it takes two to raise or care for that child. And until that's a much bigger shift. And I think we're just at the outset.
Well, you talk about, too, this tension between this focus in society on what we value and this competitive mystique, you term it, right? And we're chasing this brass ring, and we lionize. We heard it today, in the tech industry, the lone genius who's also a complete, I have my daughter in the room now, so I can't say it, a complete jerk. And we lionize that and look at that and look at billionaires and centimillionaires and things like that. But what you're talking about, this notion of caring, is not valued in the same way. What's going on there?
Yeah, I think part of it is, what I start out by saying is, look, the competitive drive and the caring instinct are equal human instincts. And we heard earlier, look, we're social animals. We would never have gotten to where we are, even back in caveman days, if we weren't social animals. But we are also competitive. As my husband thinks this is ironic that I'm now talking about care, because after a couple of years of therapy, I came back to my family at one point earlier on, and I said, I've realized I'm really quite competitive. That was not news to anybody but me. So, we both got these drives, but particularly in liberating women to have power and choices, the same options to pursue their own agendas as men had, we've totally valued the person in the family who brings in the income. And we have totally devalued my mother's traditional work, many of our mother's traditional work, the work of investing in a family, turning that pile of dollars into shelter and food and education and discipline and the nurture. All of that, if we tie it just to women, we're scared to value it because it looks like we're saying, go back to the kitchen. Women should be mothers. But in fact, what we have to do is value it for all of us. And I've been really struck listening today, if you listen through my lens, how often investing in others, which is just what care is investing in others, is so important to creating that workplace, right? That a place where you know how to care for others, know how to invest for others, exactly what you do in a family, is a much better place to work. So we need to value it across the board and not, we don't just make room for it. This is not just work is the important thing, and if you have a baby or care for your own parents or an ill spouse, well, we'll make room for that. It's we need to embrace that. We need to say, for me, somebody who wouldn't go home if their child needed them, I don't want that person in my workplace. That is not a person I want to value. That person doesn't have my values. It's not that I don't want them to do a really good job, but somebody who would say, oh yeah, well that's all right. I'll miss my kid's recital. No, right? No. Why would you do that? If you were absolutely up against a deadline, I could see it. But for most of us, you can of course make room. Or somebody who would say, my mother just fell and needs me, but I'm not going to her. I don't want to hire that person. So I think we bring those values into the workplace, recognize it makes us better human beings, better workers, but also, of course, we're providing public goods. We're investing in others.
Well, you're saying something now that I've not heard anyone say before, and that it's in your book as well, that I haven't seen anywhere, the critique is often like, well, not everyone has kids. I mean, we've even had, this company had debates when we talked about maternity policy. Somebody said, well, it's a little unfair because I don't have kids and I never want to have kids, and where's my extra 6 months off or what have you? Right. Because I'm not going to have kids, but statistically I would have 2.5. So I need 15 months off with full pay.
Gotta love engineers.
But the point you're making is that I think it sounds like is that we all have parents.
Yes.
And they need care.
Yeah.
And we have, so can you expand, like where does that insight come from, and how universal is that?
So I think that's right. I prefer family. So if you're going to talk about leave, let's talk at least about parental leave, but I prefer family leave with the understanding that that includes your parents. It includes maybe a spouse. It may include extended family members. Anyone who is ill or disabled who needs care, you should be able to take that leave for. And one of the great things about what we're doing in this country is changing our definition of what family is. Partly, as somebody said on the last panel, as we become majority minority, many of those minorities have much more extended families than traditional white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans, to the extent that's traditional. So partly you may have many more people in your family. Partly you can construct families, which is a wonderful thing.
What do you mean by that, construct families?
Meaning that a family are the people you choose to live with and you choose to care for. So obviously many of us construct families by choosing mates, but increasingly you can have people who live with you who you are caring for. In California, you can have 3 parents. Right? Legally, you can have 3 parents. I think that's a great thing. I think the more people, who are in your children's lives, so grandparents raising grandchildren, or people who are sort of aunts and uncles, but who choose to, in our family, they're people we think of as part of our family, who celebrate holidays with us, who are not biologically related to us. And so you can do a lot with that. The harder question comes from okay, well, my parents are healthy. I don't have kids. There's nobody in my family who needs care. Why don't I get to sail around the world? And that's a harder question. I would say people should have leave to do things other than work. But I don't want to say, investing in the care of a child or an aging parent is a different thing than just taking off. It's work. It's hard work. It's not taking off. So I think those are harder lines to draw.
But it's an interesting distinction you're drawing, because you're not saying taking care of somebody is nobler because it's volunteer work, right? You're not saying that if I'm going to go volunteer and help build an orphanage somewhere, I should get as much leave for that. There's something special about caring for another human being that you have a connection, maybe an obligation to, that is different in your mind.
It is, yes, it is. And I think the other thing I would say, I said before, it's a public good. And it is, right? For a long time, all of us free rode off the efforts of women who cared for, who invested in the next generation. And again, the neuroscience now shows us that investing in intensive care for those first 5 years shapes what a child will be able to learn for the rest of his or her life. So all that care that was provided by women were creating healthy, productive, competitive citizens, and the rest of us were free riding off that. Same thing with caring for elders. Those same women were caring for their parents and typically their husbands' parents, and they were making it possible then for men to continue working while the obligations to the people who were cared for them were met. So I would say, that is something very important to nurture among humanity. We've been talking about civility and respect, and all of that is a deep part of care. But I'd also say companies or government, depending how you do it, ought to recognize that care provides a public good, a deep social good, and we should put it in a separate category than even volunteering, which I'm also all for, but I think it is a different category.
Okay, so the headline is not Anne-Marie Slaughter hates volunteerism.
No. Okay. No, and investing in community. I mean, at some point this line becomes quite close.
I'm just being a terrible host, is what I'm doing.
You're just giving me another terrible headline.
exactly.
Anne-Marie Slaughter thinks women can't have it all and hates volunteering.
We'll open it up for questions in just a minute or two, but I wanted to ask about a couple more things if I could. Today we've talked, and the question is going to be, who should lead the charge on this?
Yeah.
And we've talked about how companies, somebody mentioned today, that companies are just expanding their care policies, their care leave policies, without regulation. And there's some pockets where there's more regulation. Who should lead, and in particular, what about the case of the kind of companies we saw on stage before us where you have 20 employees or 50 employees? How should you think about it? So.
Yeah. Well, if I could wave a wand, we would have universal family care of some kind or other. Like Social Security, we would simply have universal family care that anyone could take to take care of anyone else. And that would be that, you know.
It's okay to applaud, that's awesome.
And, you know, we can do it. Other societies do it. And in fact, you know, immediately in the short term, it's expensive. In the long term, again, if you want to invest in our security, our competitiveness, our equality, this is a very sensible public investment. Absent that, because I don't see that on the horizon immediately, although some of the conversations about universal basic income actually start to overlap that, so we'll see. I think what's likely to happen is that government is proceeding piecemeal, so state by state and city by city, and that really is accelerating. We heard Michelle say that suddenly, even in the last year, paid leave is gathering steam. At some point, it's going to become a problem for business to have such different standards in all these different cities. So at some point, the Chamber of Commerce will say, you know, look, it would really be better just to have consistent standards across the board. And then it'll be a question of you mandate, you must have paid leave of X number of weeks, of X amount of salary. You guys figure out state by state or city by city how you want to do it. You can do it as an insurance scheme, as a mandate, however else. Or does the federal government, you know, go further than that? But I do think companies are playing important roles, but ultimately government is going to have to at least set the standards, if not set up the system.
Well, it sounds like that's a big part of solving the small employer challenge, right?
Yes, exactly.
Some pooling of that.
Yeah, and I'll say on the smaller side, I mean, New America's about 200 people, and you can imagine, given my profile, that the question of what kind of leave we were going to have has been very much on the agenda. And you know, we have 6 weeks of paid time off to begin with that you can use for anything. You use for sick days, personal days, vacation. I require you to use 4 of those weeks a year. In other words, you can only roll over 2 weeks a year because I know you'll be a better employee, particularly for the work we do, which is very creative, if you take 4 weeks off a year. You just will be better. You'll be recharged. You'll have some interesting ideas. And then, of course, for parental leave, we have 3 months equal for the man and the woman. It is expensive. I mean, we're not that big. I feel very much. I'm not going to forget the name of the Farm Girl Flowers. The one that I feel very strongly that doing the right thing is worth the cost. You know, but I can imagine you get, you know, caught at a situation where you really can't afford to have people out. And then I think the answer is going to be partly what Emissaries is doing. In other words, you're going to start thinking of a team as not just the people who are actually working for you, but the people who are available to you, and you will have cultivated a relationship with them. And that every manager should be thinking, okay, when somebody goes out, not if, but when someone goes out, how am I going to fill that in the same way that, at least in most companies, we have some kind of succession planning. And then I think, you know, it'll be expensive short term, but again, it'll pay for itself.
Do you think, you said 4 weeks they got to take or it goes away.
Yep.
Do you think some amount of leave should be required? That not only does it not go away, but like if you haven't taken your leave until December 1, like we're going to lock the door, your badge gets turned off. You got to go recharge and take care of yourself and somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I've found the economic incentive works pretty well. When people realize it's use it or lose it, they take it. There is a problem of them all taking it in December.
Yeah.
And we, you know, it's like everybody looks at their bank and says, oh, I better go. So you need to manage it that way. But yes, essentially, all the data shows, just like it shows we do better when we get enough sleep, that, this idea that you can, work all the time with 2 weeks off in a whole year, you are just less effective. And I know it's certainly true for myself, and I've read a lot of the literature. It's again, a short-term, longer-term issue.
So 2 last very, very focused questions. What would be the ideal policy for employers to have? Would it be 6 months of caregiver leave with full pay for everyone? Would it be 2 months? Would it be just child-related? Would it be just children and cousins, but only first cousins? Would it?
Yeah, I like the first cousins.
We have a complicated family tree.
I was going to say, from the South, that would be second cousins twice removed.
Exactly. What would be ideal?
So ideal from my point of view, because we also have we've got plenty of data that shows too much time is not a good thing, and particularly for women, even though I see this as absolutely as important for men as for women, and I think men will get a huge amount out of it. I would say I don't want too much time. I think the ideal is 3 months for men and for women, with another 3 months to be negotiated for flexible work. Okay. In the sense that, and I will speak from my own experience, after 3 months I was going fairly stir crazy. I adore my children, but
I'm sure they'll never see this.
They would know it. I mean, the 1 year I spent at home when we took sabbatical, both my sons were, would you please go back to work? So I think people should be able to negotiate, how they want to come back in. But I do, again, for men, this is not just helping the women in your lives. This is for you. You have as much to gain through this, through bonding with your children, discovering you are every bit as competent a parent as a woman, that you may parent differently, you almost certainly will, but you will get freedom from the circumscribed gender roles that men have imposed upon them as providers and not caregivers, as much as women have gained from not being imposed social roles as caregivers and not competitors. And so it's whatever it is, it really does have to be equal, and men have to take it just as much as women do.
So just last question is on that. I know you want to talk about care and parental, but for men, since most of that we saw earlier, most CEOs, C-level people are men, most VP level. What's the prescription? What do you want them doing differently starting tomorrow? You talked about saying parental leave instead of maternity leave. You talked about actually taking it.
Yep.
On behalf of my gender, what else can we do?
So the other thing you can do is to talk to all young men that you mentor, every single young man in every workplace, and for the professors here, I know the women professors here have had these conversations with the women they teach, but you probably haven't with the men you teach. It's to say, have you thought about how you're going to fit your work and your family together? I know you're ambitious, that's great. If you're going to have a family, if you're thinking about you'll have a family, have you thought about, do you want a slightly different facing job? If you've been on the client facing job, do you want a more corporate job? Or are you thinking about rotating through? Have you thought about it? Because what men have to do is to lead this for themselves, but to say, look, care is all of our responsibility. How are we going to take care of it so that this idea that, care and competition, breadwinning, caregiving, care and career, however you want to put it, is all of our responsibility. And if you talk to all young men that way, including your sons, and I have 2 sons who are planning, they both want to be artists, and they are planning to be lead parents because they fully understand somebody's going to have to earn a steady income. It's not going to be them. But they get that means they are going to be the lead parents. They're likely to have the more flexible schedule. So let's talk to our sons that way just as much as we talk to our daughters.
Will do. So with that, we have just shy of 20 minutes for questions. Looks like we have one already.
Yeah, Margaret Levy, Center for Advanced Study of Behavioral Sciences at Stanford.
Role model, pioneering woman political scientist at a time when there were very few.
Marie. Wow. I'd like to turn the conversation around a little bit.
I thought that was a big deal. I thought that was pretty cool.
It is a big deal.
So I'd like to turn the conversation around a little bit, because you're really just talking about paid leave and about family leave. But the work that people do to take care of families, to provide elder care, to provide early childhood learning is real work.
Yes.
And so we really should be talking about various ways in which we value and pay for and give respect and dignity to that kind of work, including artists,
Yes, yes.
who I think also make a real contribution to the society and are insufficiently paid. So as we move into discussions about basic income, about other ways of dealing with technological change in workforces, we ought to begin to really think about recognizing that work as work.
Absolutely.
You're here.
Completely right, and it goes for the caring professions as well. So, Finland has the best education out there. The equivalent of Finnish Ivy League graduates go into teaching. They value teaching as an incredibly important profession, as we should value that work, yes, as work that is very important, that we pay caregivers, whether they're in daycare or home care aides, we pay them the same as we pay dog walkers and drink mixers and car parkers. Now just think about that for a minute. So yes, that's another big piece of this, is valuing care, professionalizing it, understanding that is a part of the capital of our society.
Hi, Jen Wessel at the University of Maryland. I'm very happy to be talking with you. In hearing you talk about how women engage more in care work, it also made me think about, and I'd just like to get your take on this, I think women are also expected to do more care work on their job, meaning they're supposed to be provide more socio-emotional support to people, and that's draining as well, and psychologically draining. And so I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on that.
I'm listening to you, remembering being a young academic, and of course, if your door is not always open, you are in trouble because you're a mother figure and you're supposed to be there, whereas the men in your department could shut their door and write the great work with far fewer consequences. So yes, I think that is true, and some of this, it's not like we've solved all the other problems, right? Everything I've said is additive, not either or. We still have plenty of discrimination. We have different expectations of women. I think for that, I would fight it the old-fashioned way, which is to simply, I would tell younger women, nope, you've got to get your work done just like the men do, and it is fine to say I'm available during this time and not other times. I think more of it is, again, still fighting the socialization that women carry, that is, if I'm not available, I'm somehow failing. I feel it more keenly, I think, than men who traditionally, it's changing now, we're raised to say, you go do the great work, honey, and I'll take care of everything else.
Another question?
Hi, I'm Dolly Chug from NYU. Thank you so much for writing an excellent book and making it come alive today. I'm curious, one of my big takeaways from reading your book was to really bring work and care in parity with each other in my mind as a mental model, which was a powerful shift for me. So then today, sitting through all our discussion about work and making work suck less and all the actionable ways we can do that, where it's leading me is then I've got work and care up here. What can we take from all our learnings today and apply to care? We have a conference here today about making work suck less. I'm not saying care sucks, but are there transferable learnings that you see from what you've heard today that apply to what we should be doing in the domain of care?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I'll just say, it took me 3 years to get to this place, right? I was raised to believe, as I said, my father was a lawyer, my mother was a homemaker. There was no question what I thought was more important. It's only really by thinking hard about, wait a minute, how did we get here and why would we think this, that I've changed my own thinking. But the lesson I took that I was taking notes was the civility one, because, often two career parents, we're stressed, we're not always at our very best when dealing with our family members. And I was listening and thinking, something I've known but came home to me today in terms of the fact that when we're uncivil, we're actually making it harder for our children to work, right? To be creative, to do their homework, that we're actually sapping their mental energy, and thinking how often I'm aware that my own snapping at a kid, wait a minute, I'm glued to my phone. I'll just say, Guy Raz has it easy. My first grader drew a family picture and drew me as a laptop. Not a woman at a laptop, just a laptop. So, I'm totally sympathetic to sort of needing that. And I thought, yeah. He did. We had the picture.
Did it get better?
He's in college, and he said, I did not, Mom. He was reading my book. I said, oh, yes, you did. We had it on the... So he seems to be relatively unscarred, at least by that part of parenting. But yes, I thought about a lot of what we were hearing today about creating an environment in which people can be their best selves. Of course you'd want to do that in the home as well. But we're human, right? We're obviously we're not going to do that all the time, but I think so much of this is the same. It's investing in others and taking the same satisfaction when they flourish as when you flourish yourself. One man wrote to me and said, I quit my job when it was clear to me that the growth potential of my children was much greater than the growth potential of my company. And that seems to me a fine way to think about both environments.
That's probably true for most people, isn't it? That's like, everyone quit. It's the message.
Maybe work a little less and invest a little more.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Am I supposed to be calling?
I just look for the waving hand.
Okay.
I think the
Barry
mic's...
Schwartz, I wanted to pursue this a little bit more because this is quite a revolutionary idea. Some years ago, a philosopher named Virginia Held wrote a book called Mothering versus Contract. And the argument in the book, now we might say, thanks to you, parenting versus contract. The argument in the book was that the rules of the game when it comes to nurturing family are fundamentally different from the rules of the game in a business context or any public context. Notions of fairness, for example. We give our kids, each kid gets what he or she needs. We don't worry about treating them equally because our intentions are to nurture our kids to successful and happy lives. So we find a way to give each kid what he or she needs. That would arouse, lawsuits, outrage, and outright sabotage if we started treating people at work the way we treat our family, because it's good for them. I think it would turn the whole society upside down. Now, that might be a really good thing. Virginia Held thought it was a good thing. But I think the implications of thinking in this way are really, they change everything, not just a few things.
Well, so a couple different responses. One is, I actually do think I try to treat my kids equally, and I think the minute I don't, boy, do I hear about it. In other words, it's a sort of classic thing that children have an innate sense of fairness, and the minute you're paying more attention or giving a better gift or whatever it is to one or the other, I think it's right that you give them what you need, but I do think fairness is very important in the family. The second thing I was thinking of was Reid Hoffman's book on the alliance, where we've moved from company as family, right? It was essentially, you put in for over your lifetime and we'll take care of you, to company as free contract, completely, at will, you do whatever you need to do and I'll do whatever I need to do, to his concept of an alliance, which is something I find very helpful. We'll invest in you, you invest in us. And that is not, I think, so far from a family model, although yes, of course, it is still based on contract more than the family. But I guess the last thing I'd say is the book that influenced me was a book written in 1971 by a male philosopher called Milton Meyerdorff, who called on caring. So written by a man at a time that work, family, women, none of that existed, where he talked about self-actualization through caring. Here's a man writing about what it is that you get when you care, and he likened it to creating an artistic, an object of art. That a composer, an artist, a sculptor, when they talk about their creation, they use very similar words. The sort of idea that you're investing in this thing, this person or this thing, but it also has a life of its own, which is just like children or parents. You can't be a good caregiver if you take over. You have to understand, and we heard that today too, that the person you're caring for, you're investing in, you're managing, has their own identity, and you have to let that come out and tailor what you're doing to that person. And I think that's equally applicable.
Hi, Zoe Chance from Yale. I'm so grateful for your role in the national dialogue
Thank you.
and creating the space for us to talk about this. And one thing I'm wondering about is the shared economy, that we see this shift in consumption, and if you envision in the future more shared caring, and especially what I see is men being much better at that than women are. So many of my friends and me sat at home just gloomy and lonely and going completely crazy and becoming very uncivil with our children. And I see a lot of dads just doing a better job of hiring, getting together for play dates, and getting other people involved, like men being better at creating a village to raise their children. What do you think?
So that's a great question. I certainly could see it coming, in part because I think men are not hung up on the perfectionist good mother thing, right? I mean, that is just not part.
Because our standards are lower? Is
Yeah.
that-
But
It's true.
your standards are lower, but the standard, they are. But the standard complaint I hear among women is, oh, dad gets to be the fun parent. But hang on here, because my husband's view is watching all the Marx Brothers movies over a weekend is much more important for your lifetime education and well-being, obviously, than cleaning your room or doing any of the other things I might think, or the enrichment activities. And I have come to think he's right. He's right.
Oh,
Yes.
thank God.
No. I really, looking at my sons now and thinking about all the fights Andy and I had, I've started to think, wait a minute, what I count as fun, I count as fun because I've got an incredibly rigid definition of mothering that was imposed upon me as the custodian of everything from table manners to cleanliness. And why is that the right way to parent? So I do think men are going to be more willing to do collaborative, interesting things. The one thing that I would say, though, my husband says that when you're doing it now, because there's so few lead parent men, it's very lonely. He says the mothers are all there talking to each other, and he's there often trying to get work done at the same time, and he doesn't feel that he had a community. I mean, our kids are much older now, but I certainly see it coming, and I think it's very healthy.
Wow, I just got to thank Zoe for that question, because rooms are never going to be cleaned again in my house. This is fantastic. I think we have time for one last very quick question.
Quick observation. So it reminds me of Leslie Perlow's work on Time Bound. As we think about these issues, and you think about how we're going to change work, make it more flexible. And a benefit of that is people actually became more productive.
Yes.
And so I think it's important to keep these things tied together.
Yes. And I think that is absolutely right. For one thing, all of us who became parents, if you're also an active caregiver, you became more productive. Suddenly you got done from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whenever that, you had to go pick up your kid at daycare, you got your work done. So absolutely, we suddenly became much more efficient time managers. But the other piece, and I was so struck by the idea that seeing reminders of childhood makes us more honest. Charles Baudelaire said, genius is neither more nor less than childhood remembered at will. And what he meant was that ability to summon the wonder of seeing something for the first time and asking questions. Why should that be? Why is the sun the way it is? All the things that kids do. Spending time. And it doesn't have to be with kids, it can be with your parents, and realizing the sort of wisdom they've gained through life and their dignity, and giving them as much dignity as you can toward the end. That will make you better too at what you do, because we know creativity is about the collision of different things. So if you do the same thing all the time, even if it's an interesting job, you're actually going to be less effective at what you do than if you mix other things into your life.
Wow. I can't think of a better note to end on, to wrap all this day together than that. Thank you.